starting with number 1 Fokker Doctor I triplane, Germany, 1917. The Fokker Doctor I became synonymous with the Red Baron, yet the aircraft that carried Manfred von Richthofen also killed him, and dozens of others. Structural failures in the upper wing caused multiple fatal crashes before Germany grounded the entire fleet in early 1918 for inspection. Poor quality control during wartime production led to wing delamination mid-flight. Pilots praised its maneuverability but feared its structural integrity at high speed. It was as lethal to its own pilots as to the enemy. 2. Sopwith Camel, United Kingdom, 1917. The Sopwith Camel was the most successful Allied fighter of World War I by kill count, and also one of the most dangerous aircraft British pilots ever sat inside. Its rotary engine generated extreme gyroscopic torque, making left turns sluggish and right turns violently fast. Inexperienced pilots were killed in training before ever reaching the front. Of the 5,490 Camels built, pilot error induced by the aircraft's unforgiving handling caused hundreds of non-combat fatalities. Veterans respected it. Novices were killed by it. 3. Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, United States, 1938. The P-40 served across North Africa, China, and the Pacific, but its performance ceiling exposed pilots to brutal disadvantages. It struggled above 15,000 feet, where it became sluggish and vulnerable to faster German and Japanese fighters. The aircraft lacked a supercharger capable of sustaining performance at altitude, leaving pilots outclimbed and outrun in critical engagements. Losses in the early Pacific theater were severe. Pilots who survived described the experience of watching enemies climb away effortlessly as one of the war's most demoralizing realities. 4. Brewster F-2A Buffalo, United States, 1939. At the Battle of Midway, the Brewster Buffalo was so outmatched by Japanese Zeros that American pilots called it a flying coffin without hesitation. The aircraft was overweight, underpowered, and dangerously slow to climb. Marine pilots flying it in 1942 suffered catastrophic losses. Entire squadrons were decimated within minutes of engagement. One squadron commander reported that the aircraft was not a combat airplane. Of the Buffaloes committed to the battle, nearly all were destroyed. Those who survived did so by fortune, not by machine. 5. Polikarpov I-16, Soviet Union, 1934. The Polikarpov I-16 was the world's first monoplane fighter with retractable landing gear, a genuine engineering leap for its time. But by the time the Soviet Union faced the Luftwaffe in 1941, it had become dangerously obsolete. Its short fuselage made it inherently unstable, demanding constant pilot correction. Soviet pilots, many already undertrained due to Stalin's purges of experienced officers, were overwhelmed by the aircraft's demands in combat. Loss rates in the opening months of Operation Barbarossa were catastrophic, with thousands destroyed on the ground and in brutal aerial engagements. 6. Heinkel He-177 Greif, Germany, 1942. The He-177 was Germany's only strategic heavy bomber and one of the most mechanically troubled aircraft of the war. Its paired engines, designed to reduce drag by driving a single propeller shaft, overheated chronically and caught fire spontaneously in flight. Crews named it the Flying Lighter. Engine fires were so frequent that crews performed pre-flight rituals fully expecting at least one engine to ignite. Hundreds of aircraft were lost to mechanical failure rather than enemy action. German High Command acknowledged the design was flawed but continued production out of strategic necessity. 7. Messerschmitt Me 163 Komet, Germany, 1944. The Me-163 Komet was the world's first operational rocket-powered fighter, and among the most dangerous aircraft any pilot of any nation was ever asked to fly. Its Walter HWK-509 engine burned a hypergolic fuel combination, so volatile that ground crews handling the propellants faced chemical burns, spontaneous ignition, and death on contact. The aircraft climbed at over 700 miles per hour, gave pilots only 90 seconds of powered flight, then glided unpowered to landing, a phase during which it was entirely defenseless. Numerous pilots were killed not in combat, but during takeoff and landing accidents. The undercarriage was jettisoned on takeoff, leaving the aircraft to belly land on a retractable skid, Any deviation during approach was fatal. 8. Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa, Japan, 1941. The Ki-43 was among Japan's primary army fighters throughout the Pacific War, but its design philosophy prioritized agility at the direct expense of survivability. It carried no armor protection for the pilot, no self-sealing fuel tanks, and was structurally light to the point of fragility. A single burst of accurate fire was sufficient to ignite the aircraft entirely. Japanese pilots who flew it described the sensation of vulnerability as constant. As Allied gunnery and aircraft improved, the Ki-43's losses became unsustainable. By 1944, experienced pilots were being lost faster than they could be replaced. 9. Hawker Typhoon, United Kingdom, 1941. The Typhoon entered RAF service as a high-altitude interceptor and nearly failed completely before finding its true role as a ground attack aircraft. Early variants suffered catastrophic structural failures. The tail section separated from the fuselage in high-speed dives, killing pilots without warning. Carbon monoxide leaks from the engine seeped into the cockpit, slowly incapacitating pilots mid-mission. Before modifications were implemented, the aircraft killed more RAF pilots through mechanical failure than through enemy action. The structural defect was not fully resolved until after dozens of unexplained losses forced an engineering review. 10. De Havilland Mosquito, United Kingdom, 1941. The Mosquito was a genuine masterpiece of wartime engineering, fast, versatile, and devastatingly effective. But its wooden construction, revolutionary at conception, became a liability in the tropics. In Southeast Asia, the humid climate caused the aircraft's bonded wooden structure to delaminate. Glue joints failed. Wings separated from fuselages in flight. Pilots operating from bases in India and Burma were flying aircraft actively coming apart around them. The RAF issued warnings, modified adhesives, and ultimately withdrew the type from certain theaters. A brilliant design betrayed by the environment it was asked to operate in. 11. Lavochkin Gorbanov Gudkov Lag. 3. Soviet Union, 1941. Soviet pilots had a name for the Lag, 3 that required no translation in meaning. Varnished Guaranteed Coffin. The acronym matched the designer's initials. The aircraft was heavy, sluggish, and dramatically underpowered for the demands of the Eastern Front. It was constructed from a composite wood material intended to conserve aluminum, but the result was an aircraft that handled poorly and outperformed nothing the Luftwaffe fielded in 1941 and 1942. Pilots assigned to it understood that survival would depend far more on evasion than engagement. It was improved over time, but not before an entire generation of Soviet pilots paid the price. 12. Lockheed P-38 Lightning, United States, 1941. The P-38 Lightning was formidable in the Pacific, where it became among the most feared American fighters of the war. In the European theater, however, it exposed a critical and often fatal flaw. At high altitude over Germany in winter conditions, the cockpit heating system was wholly inadequate. Pilots suffered severe frostbite, losing fingers and losing control of aircraft simultaneously. Compressibility effects in steep dives caused control surfaces to lock, and pilots died unable to recover before ground impact. The design issues were eventually addressed, but the European campaign cost the P-38 a significant number of pilots through conditions that should have been anticipated. 13. Messerschmitt Me Bf-109 Germany, 1937. The Bf-109 was Germany's premier fighter throughout the war, one of the most produced combat aircraft in history. Yet among its most notorious characteristics was a landing gear design that caused a disproportionate number of accidents. The undercarriage was narrow-tracked and splayed outward at an angle that made crosswind landings inherently unstable. Ground loops, collapses, and landing accidents destroyed an estimated 10% of all Bf-109s that were ever lost, not in combat, but on return. Experienced pilots accepted it as an occupational reality. Novice pilots often did not survive long enough to develop the instinct required to manage it safely. 14. Convair B-36 Peacemaker, United States, 1949. The B-36 was the largest mass-produced piston engine aircraft ever built. capable of delivering nuclear weapons to the Soviet Union from American soil. It was also mechanically exhausting to maintain and temperamental in operation. Its 6 radial engines were notoriously prone to in-flight fires and power failures. Crews described missions lasting over 40 hours in an aircraft that demanded constant management of failing systems. Engine fires during flight were frequent enough to be considered routine operational events. The aircraft served through the early Cold War, but was regarded by crews with a measure of deep professional anxiety that never fully dissipated. 15 North American F-100 Super Sabre, United States, 1954. The F-100 Super Sabre was the United States Air Force's first operational supersonic fighter, and one of the most accident-prone aircraft in American military aviation history. It suffered from a phenomenon known as inertia coupling, where high-speed rolls caused the aircraft to depart controlled flight catastrophically and without recovery. The problem was identified by test pilot Chuck Yeager during trials and reported, then inadequately addressed before the aircraft entered service. Over the course of its operational life, the F-100 was involved in over 889 accidents that resulted in the loss of the aircraft, with a significant number of pilot fatalities. Its accident rate was among the highest of any American jet in the Century series. 16 McDonnell F-101 Voodoo, United States, 1957. The F-101 Voodoo entered service as a long-range escort fighter and was later adapted for nuclear strike and reconnaissance roles. Its handling characteristics at high angle of attack were deeply problematic. The aircraft had a documented tendency to pitch up violently in certain flight regimes, a condition known as pitch-up that could cause the pilot to lose control instantaneously. The ejection seat in early variants was oriented downward, meaning that at low altitude a successful ejection was impossible. Pilots flying it during the Cold War were acutely aware of the aircraft's margins, and those who pushed beyond them rarely had the altitude required to survive the consequences. 17. Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, United States, 1958. Few aircraft in history accumulated a safety record as catastrophic as the F-104 Starfighter, particularly in its export variants. Designed by Clarence Kelly Johnson as a pure performance machine, the Starfighter was optimized entirely for speed and altitude, leaving almost no margin for error at low speed. Its wings were so small and thin they were described as razor blades. The aircraft stalled at dangerously high approach speeds and had violent departure characteristics if pushed beyond its narrow flight envelope. In West German service alone, 292 of the 916 F-104s delivered were lost in crashes, with 116 pilot fatalities. The aircraft earned the name Widowmaker not as hyperbole, but as an operational reality borne out over years of accident reports. 18 Republic F-105 Thunderchief, United States, 1958. The F-105 Thunderchief was designed for nuclear strike missions at low altitude and high speed. It was re-rolled into conventional strike operations over North Vietnam, a mission it was never built to perform and for which it paid an enormous price. Of the 833 F-105s produced, 397 were lost in the Vietnam War. It flew more strike missions over North Vietnam than any other aircraft and absorbed punishment from North Vietnamese air defenses at a rate that proved unsustainable. Pilots who flew it described the aircraft as capable and powerful, but the combination of high sortie tempo, low-altitude threat environments, and the aircraft's large radar cross-section made survival increasingly a matter of chance as the war progressed. 19 Douglas A-4 Skyhawk, United States, 1956. The A-4 Skyhawk served with distinction across decades and multiple conflicts, but in Vietnam it exposed its pilots to serious risk through a fundamental tactical limitation. It lacked radar warning receivers and comprehensive defensive systems in its early variants. Pilots flew into dense surface-to-air missile environments without adequate warning of incoming threats. Losses to SAMs in the early years of the air campaign were severe. The aircraft itself was reliable and agile, but the systems designed to keep its pilots alive were not commensurate with the threat. Many pilots who were lost were flying capable machines that simply lacked the awareness tools the combat environment demanded. 20. Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-21, Soviet Union, 1959. The MiG-21 is the most produced supersonic jet fighter in history, operated by over 60 nations across 6 decades. Its accident record across those operators reflects both its operational breadth and its genuine handling challenges. Indian Air Force MiG-21 operations resulted in over 400 crashes and more than 200 pilot fatalities over the aircraft's service life in that country alone, earning it the name Flying Coffin in Indian aviation circles. Many accidents were attributed to aging airframes, maintenance challenges, and the aircraft's unforgiving behavior at low speed and high angle of attack. The design was formidable in its era, but its longevity in frontline service with insufficient replacement aircraft cost operators dearly. 21. Sukhoi Su-7, Soviet Union, 1959. The Su-7 was the Soviet Union's primary ground attack aircraft through the 1960s and 1970s, exported widely to Warsaw Pact and aligned nations. In Indian service during the 1971 war with Pakistan, it performed strike missions but demonstrated extraordinarily high fuel consumption that left pilots with dangerously narrow return margins. Its range was so limited that pilots calculated fuel states with acute precision on every mission. Structural stress during low-altitude operations caused airframe fatigue at rates that maintenance schedules struggled to address. Pilots respected its power but operated it with the understanding that margins for error, mechanical or navigational, were extremely thin. 22. General Dynamics F-111 Aardvark, United States, 1967. The F-111 entered service surrounded by political controversy and mechanical failure. During its combat debut in Vietnam in 1968, 3 aircraft were lost in the first 6 weeks of operations. Structural failures linked to fatigue cracks in critical wing pivot components caused aircraft to break apart in flight. The program was grounded, investigated, and eventually resolved, but not before the aircraft's early reputation was defined by losses that should not have occurred. Pilots who flew it in later years regarded the fully resolved F-111 as an exceptional aircraft. The early version they were given, however, was a machine that had not been adequately proven before combat deployment. 23. McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II, United States, 1960. The F-4 Phantom was one of the most capable multi-role aircraft of its generation and a cornerstone of American air power through Vietnam and beyond. But it arrived in Vietnam with a critical tactical deficiency. It was designed without an internal gun, under the assumption that future air combat would be decided exclusively by missiles. That assumption was wrong. Early AM-7 and AM-9 missiles suffered severe reliability problems in the humidity and dust of Southeast Asia. Pilots found themselves in close-range dogfights with no gun and missiles that frequently failed to fire or track. The lesson cost lives before the gun pod was introduced and before the Top Gun program reshaped American aerial combat doctrine. 24. Northrop F-5 Freedom Fighter, United States, 1962. The F-5 was designed as a lightweight export fighter, affordable, maintainable, and widely distributed across allied nations. Its simplicity was also its limitation. Nations operating it against more capable adversaries found it consistently outmatched in speed, radar capability, and weapons load. In several conflicts, pilots flying it faced opponents in more advanced aircraft with no realistic prospect of achieving air superiority. The aircraft performed the role it was designed for, but the decision to place less capable allies in a less capable machine, while more advanced aircraft remained restricted for export, carried operational consequences that fell directly on the pilots assigned to fly it. 25. Dassault Mirage 3, France, 1961. The Mirage 3 was a pioneering Delta wing fighter that served across multiple continents and conflicts. Its Delta configuration, while providing excellent performance at high speed and altitude, imposed a significant penalty. The aircraft had no horizontal stabilizers, making low-speed handling demanding and approach speeds dangerously high. pilots unfamiliar with its characteristics were at elevated risk during landing. In several air forces that operated it under austere conditions with abbreviated training programs, the landing phase produced a disproportionate number of accidents. The aircraft was demanding by design, and the consequences of mishandling it were rarely recoverable. 26. Panavia Tornado, UK/Germany/Italy, 1979. The Tornado was NATO's primary strike aircraft through the Cold War and into the Gulf War and beyond. During the 1991 Gulf War, the RAF's Tornado Force flew low-level interdiction missions against Iraqi airfields, the exact profile for which the aircraft was designed, but also the profile most exposed to anti-aircraft artillery and short-range missiles. 7 RAF Tornadoes were lost in the conflict, the highest loss rate of any Allied aircraft type. Crews accepted that the low-level mission was necessary and that the aircraft was performing as intended. But the losses confirmed what many had understood. The mission parameters required by the Tornado's doctrine placed aircrews at the edge of survivable risk. 27. Lockheed U-2, United States, 1956. The U-2 was not a combat aircraft. It was a reconnaissance platform operating at the extreme edge of the atmosphere, collecting intelligence that shaped Cold War strategy. It was also one of the most physically punishing aircraft ever flown. Pilots operated in a full pressure suit for missions lasting up to 12 hours at altitudes where the aircraft flew within a narrow band between maximum cruise speed and a stall, a margin sometimes as small as 10 knots. Physiological decompression sickness was a documented occupational risk. The aircraft demanded absolute precision from pilots operating in conditions of profound isolation. Those who flew it understood they operated where no rescue was possible and where the aircraft itself offered almost no margin for error. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. If there are any mistakes, please let us know in the comments. We will definitely correct them. This is AI-assisted content, but it is backed by real human research. Your support means a lot, so please keep supporting us.